The Mongol Empire, the largest contiguous land empire in human history, began with a single man, Temujin. Born around 1162 in the vast steppes of Mongolia, Temujin grew up in a world defined by survival. However, when Temujin was just 9 years old, his father was poisoned by a rival tribe, the Tatars. As a teenager, he was even captured and enslaved by a rival clan. But he escaped, proving his cunning and determination. Over time, Temujin began to gather followers. He forged alliances with powerful leaders, married into influential families, and displayed exceptional military skill. He believed that the Mongols had a divine mission to conquer the world. They could cover over 100 miles in a day, allowing them to strike unexpectedly and retreat before enemies could react. Their composite bows were powerful and could pierce armor from a distance. They practiced shooting from horseback with incredible accuracy, making them deadly even while on the move. Before attacking a city, he would often send envoys demanding surrender. If the city surrendered, its people were spared, and it became part of the empire. The campaign was swift and ruthless. The cities of Bukhara, Samarkand, and Nishapur fell one by one. After a Mongol commander who was Genghis Khan's son-in-law was killed during the battle, the Mongols slaughtered nearly the entire population. The Jin controlled a large, wealthy territory that included modern-day Beijing. They burned much of the city and took massive amounts of loot. This victory opened the door for further Mongol incursions into China. The Mongol Empire would eventually conquer the entire Chinese region, but that would happen later under Genghis Khan's descendants. He spared them during his conquests and often brought them to the Mongol capital to serve his administration. He promoted the exchange of ideas across cultures and borders. He believed it was his destiny to conquer the world. In 1226, he began a campaign against the Western Jin Dynasty in northwestern China. He conquered through strategy, fear, and adaptability. He ruled through discipline, organization, and tolerance. Though remembered for his brutal tactics, he also brought stability, trade, and cultural exchange to much of the known world. Genghis Khan was not just a conqueror, he was a visionary who reshaped the world. During this campaign, Genghis Khan fell ill. Some say he was wounded in battle. Others believe he died from illness or an accident. Whatever the cause, Genghis Khan died in 1227. His body was returned to Mongolia, and his burial site was kept secret. According to legend, the funeral procession killed everyone it met to keep the location hidden. His tomb has never been found. It was under his rule that technologies like paper-making, printing, and gunpowder began to spread westward from China to Europe. The war against the Jin was long and brutal, involving multiple battles and sieges. At first, the Mongols struggled with siege warfare. Mongol soldiers patrolled the roads, and merchants could travel without fear of bandits or war. This era of peace and trade is known as the Pax Mongolica, the Mongol peace. It allowed not only goods, but also ideas, religions, and cultures to move freely across continents. Their traditional steppe tactics were ineffective against fortified cities with high walls and moats. But Genghis Khan adapted. He employed Chinese and Persian engineers to build siege weapons like catapults and battering rams. Instead, it was divided among his sons, who continued to expand and rule vast territories. His son Ogedei became the next great Khan and continued the conquest of China and moved further into Eastern Europe. The empire Genghis Khan built laid the foundation for the world's most powerful and far-reaching empire. His legacy would influence history for centuries to come. Over time, the Mongols became masters of siege warfare. Some accounts claim that over 1.7 million people were killed, though modern historians estimate the number to be lower. Regardless of the exact figure, the scale of destruction was immense and served as a warning to others. In Bukhara, Genghis Khan reportedly addressed the people in a mosque, saying, "I am the punishment of God. If you had not committed great sins, God would not have sent a punishment like me upon you." This quote, whether true or mythologized, captures the terrifying image the Mongols cultivated. He also created a sophisticated administrative system to manage his vast territory. This code governed everything from military discipline to civilian behavior. It banned theft, murder, and betrayal, and enforced religious tolerance. Genghis understood that in a diverse empire, people of all faiths had to live peacefully. He allowed Christians, Muslims, Buddhists, and others to practice their religion without interference. This policy of tolerance helped him win the support of many conquered peoples. He divided the empire into regions, each governed by a trusted general or family member. Taxes were collected fairly, and trade was encouraged. Roads were built and protected by soldiers, allowing merchants and travelers to move freely. Laws were enforced strictly, and even the Khan's own sons were not above them. But if they resisted, the Mongols would destroy the city, completely killing everyone and burning it to the ground. Word spread quickly, and many cities chose to surrender rather than face annihilation. He transformed the Mongol army into one of the most disciplined, organized, and feared military forces in history. The campaign began in 1218 after a Mongol trade caravan was attacked. Its merchants were killed by a Khwarezmian governor. Genghis Khan sent envoys to demand punishment for the incident. The Shah of Khwarezm responded by killing the Mongol envoys and humiliating them. This was a grave mistake. These stations were spread out across the empire, allowing messengers to change horses and deliver information at incredible speed. Orders from the Great Khan could travel thousands of miles in just a few days, giving the Mongols a logistical edge no other army could match at the time. The Mongols were not just fierce warriors, they were strategic masterminds. Their military success was built on several key pillars: mobility, communication, psychological warfare, and adaptation. His key philosophy was loyalty. He rewarded those who stayed loyal and punished betrayal without mercy. With his father's death, Temujin's family was cast out and left to die. Mother Holin raised Temujin and his siblings in extreme poverty. They ate wild roots and hunted small animals just to survive. They were alone, unprotected, and vulnerable in a land full of enemies. The Mongolian steppe was a harsh and unforgiving place. Nomadic tribes competed for grazing land, resources, and power. These conflicts were often brutal and bloody, and only the strongest survived. He battled rival clans, including former friends and allies. But through determination, skill, and ruthlessness, he succeeded in uniting the many Mongol tribes. In 1206, at a great tribal meeting known as the Kurultai, Temujin was proclaimed Genghis Khan, meaning universal ruler. This marked the official birth of the Mongol Empire. Temujin's early life was marked by tragedy. His father Yesuge was a tribal chief who had begun to unite some of the Mongol clans. These early experiences hardened Temujin. He learned how to fight, how to lead, and how to trust no one. Temujin's rise to power was not easy. He faced betrayal, wars, and political intrigue. Once Genghis Khan had united the Mongols, his focus shifted to expansion. Mongol warriors were all mounted archers. Each soldier had several horses, allowing them to switch mounts and ride long distances without tiring their animals. Communication was another key to Mongol success. Genghis Khan established a system of relay stations known as the Yam. Genghis Khan also employed psychological warfare. He understood that fear could be as powerful as swords and arrows. One of Genghis Khan's earliest and most brutal campaigns was against the Khwarezmian Empire, located in present-day Iran and Central Asia. In 1219, Genghis Khan launched a full-scale invasion of the Khwarezmian Empire with an army of over 100,000 men. The city of Nishapur suffered one of the bloodiest massacres in history. While conquering Central Asia, Genghis Khan also began campaigns against the Jin Dynasty in northern China. In 1215, the Mongols captured Zhengdu, the capital of the Jin Dynasty, today's Beijing. Genghis Khan's empire was growing at an astonishing rate. But it was not just a story of conquest. To maintain order, Genghis Khan implemented a legal code called the Yasa. Genghis Khan was also a patron of knowledge and culture. Although he himself was illiterate, he valued scholars, scientists, and artisans. Trade flourished under Genghis Khan. The Silk Road, which had long connected China with the Middle East and Europe, became safer than ever before. Despite his success, Genghis Khan never stopped fighting. With his death, the Mongol Empire did not collapse. Genghis Khan's rise from a poor orphan on the steppe to the ruler of the largest empire in history is one of the most remarkable stories ever told. After Genghis Khan's death in 1227, his vision did not die with him. The vast Mongol Empire was divided among his four sons Jochi Shagadai, Ogadai, and Tolui. The Jin were utterly defeated, and the Mongols absorbed their territory into the empire. They moved swiftly and with devastating effect. Cities like Ryazan, Vladimir, and Kiev were razed to the ground. The Mongols used their well-practiced siege tactics and psychological warfare to break through the fortified cities. Their campaign was not only brutal, but also tactically brilliant. The Ilkhanate, a Mongol khanate established in Persia, was founded by Hulagu Khan, grandson of Genghis Khan. This was the first major defeat for the Mongols and marked the beginning of their decline in the Middle East. However, they continued to rule Persia and Central Asia for many years, integrating with local populations and cultures. Hulag's campaign into the Middle East changed the region forever. He maintained the Mongol military structure and nomadic lifestyle, but also embraced Chinese governance, Confucian values, and administrative reforms. Kublai expanded the Grand Canal, improved the postal system, and encouraged agricultural innovation. The Golden Horde ruled over parts of Russia and Eastern Europe. They collected tribute from Russian principalities and influenced the development of Muscovy, the future Russian state. The Chagatai Khanate dominated Central Asia, and the Ilkhanate governed Persia. These khanates were semi-independent but shared a common Mongol heritage. Genghis Khan's merit-based system of promotion, religious tolerance, and codified law influenced the development of future empires. They knew that an empire built on fear could only survive if it provided stability. That's why they invested in infrastructure, protected trade, and allowed local leaders to continue their rule as long as they pledged loyalty. They were conquerors, but also nation builders. He believed in using talent wherever it could be found, regardless of ethnicity, status, or background. This meritocratic approach allowed for rapid innovation and loyalty among his subjects. They connected the East and West, fostered the first truly global economy, and showed how a relatively small nomadic population could change the course of history. The Mongol Empire reshaped the world in its own image, sometimes through fire and steel, but also through roads, trade, and law. In doing so, they laid the foundations for the modern globalized world. They proved that leadership, strategy, and unity could overcome even the harshest environments and the strongest enemies. He represents strength, unity, and national pride. The languages, borders, and cultures of Central Asia and parts of Russia still reflect Mongol influence. The Mughal Empire in India, founded by Babur, a descendant of both Timur and Genghis Khan, continued the tradition of Mongol governance and military organization, though adapted to the Indian subcontinent. In some areas, the Mongol postal system and administrative divisions were preserved for centuries. His empire may have dissolved, but his legend lives on. However, the Yuan dynasty also faced internal problems, ethnic tensions between Mongols and Chinese, heavy taxation, and natural disasters. These issues eventually led to rebellions and the fall of the dynasty in 1368. For centuries, he was seen by many in the West and Islamic world as a symbol of barbarity and destruction. But in Mongolia, he has always been regarded as a national hero. In recent decades, historians have re-evaluated his legacy, emphasizing not only his conquests, but also his contributions to law, trade, diplomacy, and cultural exchange. He welcomed foreign visitors, the most famous of whom was Marco Polo, a Venetian merchant who spent over a decade in his court. Marco Polo later wrote about his experiences in the Travels of Marco Polo, introducing Europeans to the vast wealth, technology, and culture of China. Over time, Mongol rulers in Persia converted to Islam, while those in China embraced Buddhism and Confucianism. In Russia, the Mongol presence introduced administrative systems that would later influence Tsarist rule. As horrible as the plague was, it marked a profound moment in world history, changing economies, societies, and religious outlooks. The world was becoming more interconnected, and the Mongol Empire played a critical role in that transformation. In Central Asia, the Mongols helped create a blend of Turkic and Persian culture that still exists today. In 1258, he led an assault on Baghdad, then the capital of the Abbasid Caliphate and a center of Islamic culture, science, and philosophy. Goods, ideas, technologies, and even diseases traveled along these routes. Paper, printing, the compass, and gunpowder, all Chinese inventions, made their way to Europe. where they would later fuel the Renaissance and transform Western civilization. Kublai Khan declared the founding of the Yuan dynasty and made himself emperor of China. He established his capital in Dodu, modern-day Beijing, and ruled as a traditional Chinese emperor while maintaining his Mongol identity. This was the first time in history that the whole of China was ruled by a non-Han emperor. The Mongols captured the city and executed the caliph. The libraries of Baghdad were burned or thrown into the Tigris River. This event marked the end of the Islamic Golden Age and was one of the most traumatic events in the history of the Muslim world. In 1240, the Mongols sacked Kiev. It's one of the most important cities in Eastern Europe at the time, reducing it to rubble. Ogedei also directed his generals to push westward, targeting the kingdoms of Europe. Kublai focused on completing the conquest of China, particularly the Song dynasty in the south. The Song had resisted Mongol advances for decades, but Kublai was determined to bring all of China under Mongol rule, invested heavily in naval power, engineering, and logistics to attack cities in the Yangtze River basin. One of the most famous campaigns during this period was the invasion of Kiev and Rus, in Eastern Europe, led by the legendary Mongol generals Subutai and Batakhan, the son of Joki. The leadership of the empire passed to Ogedei, the third son, whom Genghis had chosen as his successor during his lifetime. Ogedei was a capable ruler who not only maintained his father's legacy, but expanded it even further. At the Battle of Legnica, the Mongols defeated a combined army of Poles, Germans, and Knights Templar. In the same year, they crushed the Hungarian forces at the Battle of Mohi. Europe was terrified. Many believed that the Mongols were invincible and unstoppable. Under his leadership, the Mongol Empire reached deep into Eastern Europe, Russia, Persia, and China. Ogedei continued the war against the Jin Dynasty in China and finally brought it to an end. The Mongols launched their campaign into Russia in the early 1230s. After conquering the Rus territories, the Mongols turned their attention to Central and Western Europe. In 1241, they invaded Poland and Hungary. But just as it seemed that Western Europe would fall, the Mongols suddenly retreated. Ogedei Khan had died in Mongolia, and the generals returned home to attend the selection of a new great Khan. This event saved Western Europe from complete Mongol domination. Had Ogedei lived a few years longer, the history of Europe may have turned out very differently. Meanwhile, in the south, the Mongols launched campaigns into the Islamic world. The Mongols did not stop there. They attempted to move further into the Levant, but were eventually halted by the Mamluk Sultanate of Egypt at the Battle of Anjalut in 1260. While the western campaigns were ongoing, another grandson of Genghis Khan, Kublai Khan, was making history in the east. After years of war, the Song capital of Hangzhou fell in 1276, and by 1279, the last remnants of the Song dynasty were defeated. Kublai Khan's reign represented a cultural fusion of Mongol and Chinese traditions. Under the Yuan dynasty, China saw great infrastructure development. Despite its fall in China, the legacy of the Mongol Empire continued in other parts of the world. Each of the successor states adopted local customs, religions, and languages. One of the most lasting impacts of the Mongol Empire was the unprecedented level of cultural and economic exchange it enabled. The Silk Road thrived under Mongol protection. Even the Black Death, which devastated Europe in the 14th century, is believed to have spread along Mongol trade routes. The Mongols also left a powerful legacy in the realm of governance. Despite their reputation for brutality, the Mongols were also pragmatic rulers. Genghis Khan's image has changed over time. In Mongolia today, Genghis Khan's name and image are everywhere, from statues and airports to vodka bottles and currency. Even in modern geopolitics, the regions once ruled by the Mongols remain connected in surprising ways. The Mongol Empire also inspired future conquerors. Timur, the founder of the Timurid Empire, claimed descent from the Mongols and modeled his army and stayed after them. The Mongols were not just a historical phenomenon, they were a turning point in the evolution of global civilization. As we look back at their legacy, it's important to remember both the destruction and the innovation they brought. As the Mongol Empire grew, the challenge shifted from conquest to governance. Controlling such a vast territory stretching from the Pacific Ocean to the borders of Europe required more than a strong army. This secret but strict code was intended to maintain unity and discipline across the empire. The empire encompassed a wide variety of cultures and faiths. Muslims in Persia, Christians in Eastern Europe, Buddhists in Central Asia, and Confucian scholars in China. Rather than forcing one religion on everyone, Genghis allowed freedom of worship. Religious leaders were often exempt from taxes and served as important advisors. They protected caravans, repaired roads, and enforced law along trade routes. This ancient trade route had once connected China and the Mediterranean, but had fallen into decline due to instability and war. Under Mongol rule, the Silk Road became safer than ever. Merchants could travel from Venice to Beijing without fear of being robbed or attacked. This led to a dramatic increase in the exchange of goods, including silk, porcelain, spices, precious metals, and art. One of the most devastating was the Black Death, or bubonic plague. It demonstrated that a vast empire could be governed effectively through law, tolerance, and organization. It showed that cultural exchange could enrich civilizations, and that peace could be maintained without complete assimilation. The Mongols proved that unity and diversity was not only possible but powerful. The disease is believed to have originated in Central Asia and spread along trade routes established by the Mongols. By the mid-14th century, the plague had reached Europe, killing an estimated 25 to 50 million people. Although the Mongols didn't cause the plague, their global empire made its spread possible. The Ilkhanate rulers converted to Islam, while the Yuan rulers adopted many Chinese traditions. Corruption, natural disasters, and economic problems weakened the regime. In 1368, the Ming Dynasty overthrew the Mongols and reclaimed China. In India, the Mughal Empire, founded by Babur, descendant of both Genghis Khan and Timur, brought new forms of governance and culture. The Mughals ruled much of the Indian subcontinent for centuries, building landmarks like the Taj Mahal and blending Persian, Islamic, and Indian traditions. They had no gunpowder, no navies, no great cities, yet they conquered and ruled the largest land empire the world has ever seen. They used strategy, discipline, speed, and intelligence to outmaneuver their enemies. They adapted quickly and turned their weaknesses into strengths. They were feared, but also respected, destroyed, but they also built. And while their empire eventually disappeared, their legacy is still felt today in maps, languages, borders, and history books. The Mongols retreated to the steppes, and their influence in China faded, but their legacy remained. The Mongols, once dismissed as uncivilized nomads, created a system that connected continents, fostered trade, encouraged tolerance, and reshaped civilizations. They challenged the assumptions of their time and rewrote the rules of empire. In areas like Afghanistan, Kazakhstan, and even Siberia, Mongol ancestry remains part of the population's genetic and cultural makeup. Over time, the Mongol identity was absorbed into the cultures they had conquered. In this way, the same system that allowed for the exchange of goods and ideas also facilitated one of the deadliest pandemics in human history. This ensured that goods could move from one end of the empire to the other with unprecedented safety and speed. Technologies like papermaking, the compass, gunpowder, and printing spread from China to the west. The Mongols welcomed foreign visitors and diplomats. One of the most famous was Marco Polo, a Venetian merchant who traveled to the court of Kublai Khan in the 13th century. Marco Polo spent over 17 years in China, serving the Khan and exploring the vast empire. Eventually, Russian leaders like Ivan III would challenge and overthrow Mongol dominance, setting the stage for the rise of the Russian Empire. In Persia, the Ilkhanate dissolved into smaller states, but Mongol descendants continued to play key roles in regional politics. The Chagatai Khanate split into western and eastern divisions, each with its own fate. His book, The Travels of Marco Polo, introduced Europeans to the wonders of Asia and inspired later explorers like Christopher Columbus. Medical knowledge, mathematical concepts, and religious beliefs moved across borders. They brought in Persian engineers to help build siege weapons, Chinese bureaucrats to manage taxes, and Islamic astronomers to improve their calendar. The Mongols believed in using the best minds available, regardless of their background. This practical approach helped them create a highly efficient and surprisingly modern system of governance. Mongol patronage of scholars helped preserve and transmit classical knowledge during a time when much of Europe was still in the Dark Ages. Markets in Samarkand, Baghdad and Xi'an became bustling centers of commerce. This tolerance helped prevent rebellion and allowed diverse communities to coexist peacefully under Mongol rule. The Yasa covered everything from military conduct to civil rights and taxation. It punished theft and adultery, enforced loyalty and obedience, and protected the property of common people. In a time when laws were often arbitrary and corrupt, the Yasa helped ensure fairness at least within the Mongol framework of justice. It demanded an efficient system of administration, communication, and law. This is where Genghis Khan's genius truly shined. While he is often remembered for his brutality on the battlefield, his administrative reforms were just as groundbreaking. People were promoted based on skill and loyalty, not birth or wealth. Every 25 to 30 miles, a station was established with fresh horses, food, and shelter for couriers. These messengers carried government orders, military instructions, and trade updates across thousands of miles in record time. The YAM system not only connected the empire, but also allowed it to react quickly to threats and opportunities. This system attracted talented individuals from all backgrounds, including former enemies, prisoners of war, and foreigners. Genghis Khan famously said, "A man's loyalty is worth more than his bloodline." This philosophy created a multi-ethnic empire held together not by race or language, but by loyalty to the Khan. One of Genghis Khan's first major decisions was to build a legal code known as the Yasa. Another of Genghis Khan's administrative strengths was his policy of religious tolerance. The Mongols also developed a merit-based system for government appointments. Another cornerstone of the Mongol administration was the YAM system, a vast network of relay stations that functioned like a medieval postal service. Trade and commerce flourished under Mongol rule. The Mongols themselves were not merchants, but they understood the value of trade. One of the most significant results of Mongol control was the revival and expansion of the Silk Road. But it wasn't just goods that traveled along the Silk Road, it was ideas. This cultural exchange also brought people together in surprising ways. Another example of the Mongols' openness was their use of foreign experts. However, with increased connectivity came unintended consequences. Despite this tragedy, the Pax Mongolica Mongol peace had a lasting legacy. As time went on, the empire began to fragment into smaller khanates. The four main divisions were the Yuan Dynasty in China, led by Kublai Khan, the Ilkhanate in Persia, founded by Hulagu Khan, the Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia, the Golden Horde in Russia and Eastern Europe. These khanates operated independently, but maintained loose connections with each other. Each adopted local customs and religions. The Yuan dynasty in China faced growing resistance from the native Han Chinese population. The Golden Horde continued to rule over parts of Russia for centuries, collecting tribute and influencing the rise of Moscow. Despite the decline of the empire, the cultural and political effects of Mongol rule endured. In Central Asia, Mongol-Turkic hybrids became common. The Mongols also left behind linguistic traces. Many modern languages in Central Asia include Mongol words, and some writing systems were influenced by Mongol scripts. What makes the Mongol story so remarkable is that they achieved all of this without advanced technology or vast population numbers. Genghis Khan's empire showed that power could come from unlikely places. In education, science, trade, diplomacy, and war, the Mongols left an indelible mark. The governance system, introduced by Genghis Khan, was a major reason for the stability and longevity of the Mongol Empire. He understood that conquering territories was only half the task. The other half was ruling them effectively. He imposed severe punishments for crimes to deter disobedience and encourage lawfulness. He also emphasized merit over birthright. Many of his top generals and advisors were not born into elite families, but rose through the ranks due to their talent and loyalty. This meritocratic system created a powerful and motivated leadership class that was deeply loyal to Genghis. Under the rule of Genghis Khan and his successors, this vast network of trade routes flourished like never before. Spices, silk, paper, ceramics, precious stones, and metals flowed across continents. More importantly, ideas, technology, and cultural practices also spread. Islamic mathematics and medicine made their way to China, while Chinese inventions like printing, the compass, and gunpowder reached Europe. This exchange contributed to the European Renaissance and reshaped global civilizations. The Venetian explorer Marco Polo famously visited Kublai's court and later wrote about the wealth and order of the Mongol-ruled Chinese Empire. The vast distances between the Khanates and the growing cultural differences led to fragmentation. The central authority weakened as each region pursued its own interests. Civil wars broke out and succession disputes became common. These internal struggles made the Mongol Empire increasingly vulnerable to external attacks and rebellion. These accounts amazed Europeans and helped shape their perceptions of Asia for centuries. Historians believe that the interconnectedness of the empire helped the plague travel quickly from Asia to Europe. In modern Mongolia, he is revered as a national hero and a symbol of unity, strength, and pride. Scholars, artists, scientists, and traders from vastly different backgrounds interacted and collaborated. The Mongol Empire acted as a giant melting pot where knowledge was exchanged and preserved. Manuscripts were translated, medical ideas were shared, and inventions spread across continents. His image appears on currency, statues, and in the hearts of the Mongolian people. Defensive walls, military reforms, and diplomatic missions to the east became more common. The Mongols changed how the world saw Asia and vice versa. Nations had learned from the Mongols how to wage war, how to rule diverse peoples, and how to trade over vast distances. In many ways, the world we live in today still bears the fingerprints of the Mongol legacy. Around the world, he is studied as a leader who, despite his brutality, showed visionary qualities rarely seen in history. He was a complex figure, both a destroyer and a builder. His military campaigns caused immense destruction, but they also gave rise to one of the most efficient and open empires in human history. They are a testament to the power of leadership, vision, and the ability to adapt. Genghis Khan's journey from an orphan nomad to the ruler of half the known world is one of history's most incredible transformations. He built an empire not just with the sword, but with law, administration, and respect for diversity. And that is why his name still echoes through time. He shattered the old world and made space for a new, interconnected one. It was the largest contiguous land empire ever created, stretching from the Pacific Ocean to the Danube River. At its height, it controlled roughly 22% of the Earth's total land area. But beyond its size, the Mongol Empire fundamentally altered the course of civilization. The disease devastated populations across the known world, further weakening the Mongol hold on its territories. The Mongols guaranteed safety for merchants and travelers along the Silk Road by deploying patrols and relay stations called the Yam. These stations offered food, shelter, and fresh horses, allowing information and goods to travel rapidly across vast distances. For this, Genghis created a legal code known as the Yasa. While the exact contents of the Yasa remain largely unknown due to its secrecy, historical sources suggest it was a comprehensive set of laws that promoted order, loyalty, discipline, and justice. The Pax Mongolica, the Mongol peace, created the most secure and efficient trading environment in the medieval world. Their strategies were studied by military leaders long after the empire dissolved. Their innovations in communication, logistics, and psychological warfare set the standard for centuries. This laid the groundwork for global commerce and influenced future empires like the Ottoman and British. He had laid a strong foundation and divided the empire among his sons and grandsons in a way that preserved unity and encouraged further expansion. For example, the Ilkhanate eventually adopted Islam and Persian culture, while the Yuan dynasty became heavily influenced by Chinese traditions and Confucian governance. The empire was split into four major khanates: the Yuan dynasty in China under Kublai Khan, the Ilkhanate in Persia, the Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia, and the Golden Horde in Russia, completed the conquest of China and established the Yuan dynasty in 1271. Unlike his grandfather, Kublai sought to legitimize his rule by embracing Chinese customs and becoming an emperor in the traditional Chinese sense. He moved the capital to what is now Beijing and built a multi-ethnic administration. He granted religious leaders tax exemptions and protected temples, churches, and mosques. This policy won him the favor of Buddhists, Christians, Muslims, and others across Asia and the Middle East. By avoiding religious persecution, the Mongol Empire experienced fewer rebellions and was seen as a more benevolent power compared to others. It applied equally to everyone, regardless of their rank or background, which was revolutionary in an era dominated by aristocratic privilege. Genghis Khan's laws included strict rules on theft, betrayal, and rebellion. Another innovative governance method was the implementation of a decimal military system. The army was divided into units of tens, hundreds, thousands, and 10,000s, known as Arban, Jagan, Mingan, and Tumen, respectively. The structure wasn't limited to the military, but extended to civilian life in conquered areas, allowing for streamlined administration, taxation, and conscription. It also ensured that each leader had manageable command over their men, and that discipline could be maintained efficiently. Religious tolerance was another cornerstone of Mongol rule. Genghis Khan realized early on that the key to governing a multi-ethnic, multi-faith empire was allowing freedom of religion. One of the greatest legacies of the Mongol Empire is the protection and revival of the Silk Road. The secure environment led to an explosion of trade between East and West. Although Genghis Khan passed away in 1227, his legacy did not die with him. Each of these khanates retained the core principles of Mongol governance: military prowess, trade facilitation, and cultural tolerance, while also adapting to the local customs and religions. Kublai Khan, Genghis Khan's grandson, stands out as one of the most successful successors. Under Kublai's reign, China experienced economic growth, improved infrastructure, and increased international contact. While the empire continued to expand, internal divisions began to emerge. The decline of the Mongol Empire also coincided with the spread of the Black Death in the mid-14th century. Despite its eventual collapse, the Mongol Empire left an indelible mark on world history. One major impact was the acceleration of global trade. The Mongols also influenced warfare with their emphasis on speed, mobility, and adaptability. Genghis Khan's story also inspired political movements and nation-building efforts. Another long-lasting consequence was the cultural fusion that occurred under Mongol rule. Even in Europe, the fear and fascination with the Mongols influenced the way societies developed. While Genghis Khan is often portrayed in the West as a ruthless warlord, this view oversimplifies his impact. By the time the Mongol Empire declined in the late 14th century, the world had changed. The Mongol Empire's rise and fall are not just tales of conquest and collapse. The death of Genghis Khan in 1227 did not mark the end of the Mongol Empire. On the contrary, it marked the beginning of a new era of Mongol expansion. Genghis had laid the foundation of an empire that his descendants would expand to unprecedented heights. This task fell to Kublai Khan, a grandson of Genghis Khan, who founded the Yuan dynasty in 1271. Kublai completed the conquest of the Song in 1279. In 1258, Hulagu famously captured Baghdad, the seat of the Abbasid Caliphate, and sacked the city. The Pax Mongolica, or Mongol Peace, was a period of relative peace and stability that stretched from China to Eastern Europe. During this time, trade flourished along the Silk Road. After the death of Kublai Khan in 1294, the empire began to fragment. The four main Khanate in China, the Ilkhanate in Persia, the Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia, and the Golden Horde in Russia became increasingly independent and drifted apart culturally and politically. His descendants ruled in various parts of Asia for centuries. In Mongolia, he is celebrated as a national hero and a symbol of unity and strength. Genghis Khan built an army that was not only disciplined and highly mobile, but also incredibly well-structured. The core unit of the Mongol army was based on a decimal system. Soldiers were grouped into units of 10, 100, 1,000, and 10,000. Each level had its own commander, ensuring clear communication and hierarchy during battles. This structure allowed the army to function like a machine, with orders passed quickly and formations adapting seamlessly in the chaos of war. His image appears on currency, monuments, and even airport names. The Mongol Empire he founded is remembered not just for its conquests, but also for its role in shaping the modern world. In India, for example, the Mughal Empire, which emerged in the 16th century, was founded by Babur, a descendant of both Genghis Khan and Tamerlane. The Mongol tradition of religious tolerance, military organization, and administrative systems influenced many later empires and states. Each warrior often had multiple horses and could switch mounts during long campaigns. allowing them to cover astonishing distances at speed. Entire cities would sometimes surrender without a fight simply due to the Mongols' terrifying reputation. When resistance was met, however, Genghis Khan would unleash brutal massacres to send a message to other cities. He used tactics like pretending to retreat only to draw enemies into ambushes, and spreading false rumors about the size of his army to cause panic. These strategies kept enemies confused, demoralized, and afraid. It's recorded that Mongol armies could move over 100 miles in a day, almost unheard of feat in medieval warfare. This mobility allowed them to outmaneuver enemies, launch surprise attacks, and retreat before the enemy could counterattack. Internal power struggles, succession disputes, and resistance from conquered peoples weakened the empire over time. Goods, people, technologies, and ideas moved more freely than ever before. The Mongols encouraged trade and protected merchants, including European travelers such as Marco Polo, who journeyed to the court of Kublai Khan and later shared his experiences with the Western world. This event marked the end of the Islamic Golden Age and sent shockwaves through the Muslim world. They facilitated the transfer of papermaking, printing, gunpowder, and the compass from China to Europe. This exchange of ideas helped to lay the groundwork for the European Renaissance centuries later. The Mongol Empire was instrumental in connecting East and West, creating a globalized world centuries before the term even existed. The city's libraries, schools, and mosques were destroyed, and thousands of people were killed. It was one of the most devastating military campaigns in the region's history. Eventually, the dynasty was overthrown by the Ming in 1368. In Persia, the Ilkhanate collapsed into smaller regional states. The Golden Horde in Russia lost power as the Russian principalities gradually grew stronger and more autonomous, and the Chagatai Khanate split into eastern and western factions, further weakening the Mongol hold on Central Asia. Uniting China under Mongol rule for the first time, he moved the capital to what is now Beijing and ruled as a Chinese emperor while still retaining his Mongol heritage. The Yuan dynasty was a unique fusion of Mongol and Chinese cultures, bringing about a period of economic prosperity, cultural exchange, and relative stability. His sons and grandsons, including Ogedei, Kublai, and Hulegu, continued the conquest with fervor and discipline, pushing the empire's boundaries across Asia and into parts of Europe and the Middle East. Ogedei Khan, Genghis Khan's third son, became the Great Khan after his father's death. He was instrumental in consolidating the empire and pushing its borders even further. Under his rule, the Mongols conquered much of Eastern Europe, including Poland and Hungary, and launched further campaigns into the Middle East and China. Ogedei built a capital at Karakoram and helped to create a centralized government that could better manage the vast empire. He also established a postal system, rest stops, a network of communication routes that improved trade and coordination across the empire. One of the most ambitious projects of the Mongol Empire was the conquest of Song China. Meanwhile, in the Middle East, another of Genghis Khan's grandsons, Hulegu Khan, led the Mongol conquest of Persia, Iraq, and parts of Syria. Despite their reputation for brutality, the Mongols were also responsible for unifying much of Eurasia in a way that had never been seen before. The Mongols also contributed to the spread of technology and knowledge. Yet the very size and diversity of the Mongol Empire also made it difficult to govern in the long term. In China, the Yuan dynasty struggled to maintain control as native Chinese resented Mongol rule. Despite the fall of the unified Mongol Empire, the legacy of Genghis Khan endured. Even today, Genghis Khan remains a figure of immense historical significance. One of the greatest reasons for the Mongol Empire's success was its military organization. Mobility was the essence of Mongol warfare. Mongol soldiers rode small but extremely hardy horses that could travel great distances without tiring. The Mongols were also masters of psychological warfare. Genghis Khan understood that fear could be as powerful as swords. Another key to their success was adaptability. The Mongols were quick to learn from the civilizations they conquered. When they encountered advanced siege warfare techniques in China and Persia, they quickly adopted them. Messages and commands could be sent across thousands of miles in a matter of days. This allowed Genghis Khan to keep control over vast distances and coordinate complex campaigns. These stations also served merchants and diplomats, making trade and governance smoother throughout the empire. This unwritten law governed everything from how spoils of war were divided to how officers treated civilians. Theft, betrayal, and cowardice were harshly punished. They combined the best elements of steppe warfare with innovations from the sedentary civilizations they conquered. They employed espionage, scouts, cartographers, and coordinated multi-front invasions with a level of sophistication far ahead of their time. Loyalty to the Khan and to fellow warriors was paramount. The Yasa provided a moral and organizational foundation for a vast and diverse empire. He appointed loyal and capable administrators, often regardless of their ethnic background. The Silk Road, which connected China to the Middle East and Europe, was revitalized under Mongol protection. Merchants could travel from one end of the empire to the other without fear of bandits, thanks to the strict enforcement of Mongol law. This economic growth enriched both the Mongol state and the territories it ruled. He abolished tribal distinctions and implemented a military-based identity system that encouraged loyalty to the empire over clan or tribe. But more importantly, he left behind a legacy of law, order, and innovation. Genghis Khan's methods of warfare, governance, and diplomacy influenced generations of leaders around the world. Even centuries after his death, his name evokes both awe and fear. He was buried in an unmarked grave somewhere in Mongolia, as per his wishes. And the exact location remains a mystery to this day. He transformed a collection of warring nomadic tribes into one of the most powerful empires the world has ever known. His legacy lives on, not only in the bloodlines of millions of people around the world, but also in the systems of government, trade, and communication that his empire helped inspire. His successors continued his vision, expanding the empire even further. This prevented internal conflict and fostered a strong sense of Mongol identity. Persians, Chinese, Turks, and Mongols all found roles within his growing bureaucracy. Chinese printing techniques, Islamic astronomy, and Persian medicine spread far and wide. The Mongols even brought paper money into use in parts of their empire and adopted Chinese administrative practices. Scholars, scientists, and travelers shared ideas across regions that had previously been isolated. His administrators collected taxes, maintained order, and managed communication systems across vast regions. They hired engineers, sappers, and craftsmen from captured territories to build catapults, trebuchets, and siege towers. Although he himself practiced Tendrism, a shamanistic belief system, he allowed Christians, Muslims, Buddhists, and others to worship freely within his empire. This tolerance fostered loyalty among his diverse subjects and avoided unnecessary rebellion. They built roads, bridges, and postal stations to maintain control and improve travel. The YAM system, their relay communication network, allowed messages and intelligence to travel thousands of kilometers in record time. This allowed rulers to stay informed and act quickly during crises or rebellions. It was a stark contrast to many other empires of the time, which often persecuted religious minorities. They carried dried meat, fermented mare's milk, and even horse blood in extreme situations for sustenance. Unlike many conquerors who relied solely on brute strength, Genghis Khan showed a surprising level of sophistication in governance. While much of it was kept secret and transmitted orally, its principles were clear: loyalty to the Khan, respect for the empire's authority, harsh punishment for crimes, and equal responsibility under the law. Theft, treason, desertion, and lying were all punishable by death. But the Yasa also emphasized religious freedom, protection for diplomats, and duties to family and tribe. He knew that to hold such a sprawling empire together, he would need more than military might. He would need organization, tolerance, and laws. This independence meant that armies could operate far from supply lines, enabling deep raids into enemy territory. The Mongol military machine didn't rely on traditional supply chains, making them faster and more versatile than any contemporary army. The Mongols were just as comfortable conducting siege warfare as they were fighting on open steppes. One famous tactic was the use of feigned retreats. Mongol cavalry would simulate panic and flee from the battlefield, luring enemy forces into a chase. Once the enemy was strung out and disorganized, hidden Mongol units would encircle and annihilate them. This required not only discipline, but also immense trust in leadership and coordination among the ranks. It was devastatingly effective and caught many experienced generals off guard. Communication was another major advantage. The Mongols established a system of relay stations, known as the Yam, where riders could rest and change horses. Brave soldiers, regardless of origin, could rise through the ranks if they showed loyalty and competence. This fostered a sense of loyalty and purpose among his men, and many foreign soldiers, such as Turks and Chinese, eventually joined his army. It also allowed him to field a multi-ethnic force that still operated under a unified code. Every soldier in the Mongol army was expected to be self-sufficient. Genghis Khan also emphasized meritocracy. Leadership was earned, not inherited. The Mongols' commitment to their code of law, known as the Yasa, also played a role in military discipline. While the Mongols' brutality is well remembered, their military brilliance is often overlooked. As Genghis Khan expanded his empire across Asia, he faced a new challenge, ruling over vast and diverse territories. One of his first steps toward unifying his empire was the establishment of a written legal code called the Yasa. Genghis Khan was remarkably tolerant when it came to religion. To ensure smooth governance, Genghis Khan implemented a system of meritocracy. Trade flourished under Mongol rule. Genghis Khan created one of the safest and most extensive trade networks in the ancient world. Cultural exchange also thrived during this period. Knowledge, technology, and art flowed freely across the empire's borders. Despite their fearsome reputation, the Mongols contributed greatly to infrastructure. Genghis Khan also worked to unify the Mongol tribes into a single people. When Genghis Khan died in 1227, he left behind an empire larger than any the world had ever seen. The Mongol Empire would go on to become the largest contiguous empire in history. Stretching from the Pacific Ocean to Eastern Europe, though often remembered as a ruthless conqueror, Genghis Khan was also a brilliant administrator and visionary. After Genghis Khan's death in 1227, his vast empire was divided among his sons and grandsons, each given a portion to govern. This was part of his succession plan, which followed Mongol tradition, but it came with challenges. While his descendants remained loyal to the overarching concept of the Mongol Empire, the unity that Genghis had forged began to fragment over time. He eventually became Emperor of China and founded the Yuan Dynasty, which officially ruled China from 1271 to 1368. This Khanate included present-day Iran, Iraq, and parts of the Caucasus. This Khanate covered much of what is now Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Western China. It played a key role in trade along the Silk Road and remained culturally diverse. It was a center of Islamic scholarship and scientific advancement, and maintained the Mongol tradition of religious tolerance. Local customs, languages, and religions gradually replaced Mongol traditions. His reign marked the high point of the Mongol Empire's cultural integration and administrative achievements, but also its political fragmentation. Additionally, internal rebellions, economic instability, and growing resistance from conquered peoples undermined the Mongols' hold on power. Although he expanded and solidified control in China, he failed in his invasions of Japan and Southeast Asia, demonstrating the limits of Mongol power. In Persia, the Ilkhanate disintegrated due to internal strife and invasions by new powers such as the Timurids. The Chagatai Khanate split into eastern and western parts and lost its unity. Though Genghis Khan and his armies are often remembered for their brutal conquests and massive destruction, their rule also brought about many profound and lasting changes in the world, politically, culturally, economically, and socially. For the first time in centuries, trade routes such as the Silk Road operated safely and efficiently under the protection of a single empire. This facilitated a massive exchange of goods, ideas, religions, and technologies between East and West. Spices, silk, porcelain, and paper from China moved westward, while glassware, medicine, and science from the Islamic world and Europe moved eastward. In China, the Yuan dynasty was overthrown by the Ming dynasty in 1368. Ending Mongol rule in East Asia, and adaptability in battle changed how wars were fought. Armies in Europe and Asia began to adopt similar tactics. The Mongol emphasis on intelligence gathering and rapid mobility reshaped military thinking for centuries. This attitude encouraged cooperation with local elites and prevented the kind of religious persecution that had destabilized other empires. Though they initially came from a nomadic background, They quickly adopted and improved upon the bureaucratic systems of the civilizations they conquered. This cross-pollination of ideas and skills helped advance knowledge in fields like astronomy, medicine, and engineering. Papermaking and printing technology spread from China westward, eventually reaching Europe and contributing to the Renaissance. They used written laws, census records, tax systems, and postal routes to manage their vast territories. The YAM system, a network of relay stations and mounted couriers, enabled fast communication across thousands of miles, something no other empire had managed so effectively. It also allowed different belief systems to flourish and spread across the continent. Conflicts occasionally erupted between Khanates, especially as different heirs claimed the title of Great Khan. The Khanates continued to shape the regions they once ruled, leaving behind a complex legacy of both destruction and development. The struggle for supremacy led to wars, weakened the central authority, and further divided the empire. Although they did not settle permanently, they exerted political and military influence over the Russian principalities for centuries, collecting tribute and demanding loyalty. Kublai Khan shifted the Mongol capital to Dadu and embraced Chinese customs, administration, and culture. The empire was divided into several khanates, each ruled by different branches of the family. The four major divisions were the Yuan dynasty in China, ruled by Kublai Khan, Genghis Khan's grandson; the Ilkhanate in Persia, founded by Hulagu Khan, another of Genghis Khan's grandsons. And leadership had built a world-spanning empire. The very scale of that empire made long-term unity difficult to maintain. Still, the systems he put in place allowed his descendants to rule effectively for generations and spread. Mongol influence across Eurasia. The Chagatai Khanate, located in Central Asia, was ruled by descendants of Genghis Khan's son Chagatai. The Golden Horde, founded by Batu Khan, ruled over Russia, Ukraine, and parts of Eastern Europe. These khanates maintained relative peace and trade between them through the Pax Mongolica, a term historians use to describe the period of relative stability and law across Eurasia under Mongol rule. This period allowed trade, culture, and knowledge to flow more freely than ever before. Merchants, missionaries, and explorers such as Marco Polo could travel from Europe to China in safety, documenting their journeys and spreading ideas. Despite the advantages of this division, each khanate began to develop its own distinct identity. Kublai Khan, in particular, claimed the title of Great Khan in 1260, but his rule was not accepted by all. The decline of the empire was gradual. Plagues such as the Black Death in the mid-14th century severely affected trade and population across the empire. In Russia, the Golden Horde eventually fragmented into smaller khanates, which were later conquered by the rising power of Moscow. Although the unified Mongol Empire did not last long after Genghis Khan's death, its influence endured. The story of the Mongol Empire's division reveals that while Genghis Khan's visioned the legacy of the Mongol Empire is vast and complex, one of the most significant impacts of the Mongol Empire was the establishment of the Pax Mongolica, a period of peace and stability across much of Asia and Eastern Europe. The Mongols were surprisingly tolerant of religions. Genghis Khan himself practiced a traditional Mongol shamanism, but allowed freedom of worship for Buddhists, Muslims, Christians, and others within his empire. In terms of governance, the Mongols created one of the most efficient and adaptable administrative systems of the medieval world. Culturally, the Mongol Empire helped blend different civilizations. Persian scholars worked in China, Chinese artisans lived in Persia, and Russian craftsmen were brought to Central Asia. The Mongols also had a profound influence on warfare. Their military strategies, including the use of cavalry, feigned retreats, psychological warfare. However, the Mongol Empire's legacy also has a darker side. Their campaigns were often accompanied by mass slaughter, especially of cities that resisted. Though they did not create the plague, the interconnected world they fostered allowed it to spread more quickly and widely, leading to the death of tens of millions in Europe, the Middle East, and Asia. The sieges of Nishapur, Baghdad, and other great cities resulted in the deaths of hundreds of thousands. Entire populations were sometimes wiped out. Now, some of these accounts may be exaggerated. There is little doubt that their invasions caused widespread suffering and demographic collapse in many areas. The Mongols also inadvertently facilitated the spread of diseases. The most famous example is the Black Death, which traveled along trade routes protected by the Mongols. Each Khanate faced its own internal issues and external threats. Kublai adopted many Chinese customs and established a grand imperial court in Beijing. However, following his death in 1294, the Yuan dynasty faced repeated rebellions and natural disasters. By 1368, the Ming dynasty had risen in revolt and expelled the Mongols from China, forcing them to retreat back to the steppes. For example, the Ilkhanate collapsed due to financial problems and dynastic conflicts. Some view him as a genocidal warlord, others as a visionary leader who built bridges between civilizations. In West, promoting trade and enabling a golden age of cultural exchange, the Mongol Empire has inspired films, books, academic studies, and even business strategies. With Genghis Khan's leadership style analyzed in management schools, what cannot be denied is the enormity of his achievement. A man born on the Mongolian steppe who rose to command the largest contiguous land empire in human history. This astonishing number speaks not just to his personal virility, but also to the vastness of his empire and the cultural dominance of his dynasty. That innovation can come from unexpected places, and that even the most powerful empires are subject to change and decline. Genghis Khan showed that the world could be shaped by willpower, discipline, and vision even if born in a tent on the edge of nowhere. The Golden Horde gradually lost its hold over Russian principalities, which began asserting their independence and power, most notably under the leadership of Ivan III of Moscow. Despite their eventual decline, the Mongols changed the world forever. His descendants ruled across Asia and Europe, reshaping the world for generations. Though the empire he built is gone, its influence continues to echo in the roads we travel, the cities we live in, and the ideas we share across borders. They connected continents, toppled old powers, created new ones, and opened the door to a truly global era of exchange. The Khanates persisted in some form for decades, and their impact continued to shape the regions they once ruled. The efficient postal system and administrative models they developed inspired future governments. Their diplomatic practices, especially sending envoys and establishing international relations, paved the way for modern diplomacy. Their military innovations and psychological tactics became case studies in military schools around the world. In Russia, the experience under Mongol domination influenced the rise of a centralized autocratic state. In Persia, Mongol rulers had embraced Islam and contributed to the region's rich cultural and scientific development. Statues, monuments, and even the capital's airport bear his name. Across Asia, the memory of the Mongols is a reminder of both devastation and innovation. Genghis Khan often promoted talented individuals regardless of ethnicity or religion. He abolished the aristocratic privilege of the Mongol tribes, preferring loyalty and merit. His legal code, the Yasa, promoted discipline, order, and unity in a chaotic time. Following Genghis Khan's death in 1227, his descendants ruled the empire together, but soon divided it into four major khanates: the Golden Horde in Russia, the Ilkhanate in Persia, the Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia, and the Yuan Dynasty in China. While these regions initially cooperated, over time they developed their own agendas, rulers, and even rivalries. The influence of Genghis Khan and his empire can still be seen in modern borders, cultures, and even in the DNA of millions of people. Its legacy is not simply one of conquest, but of transformation. Genghis Khan did not just conquer half the world, he helped shape the world that would follow. Genetic studies suggest that a large number of men today carry a white chromosome lineage that can be traced back to Genghis Khan himself, a testament to his empire's vast reach and the legacy he left behind. In Mongolia today, Genghis Khan is revered as a national hero and symbol of unity and pride. Ultimately, the Mongol Empire was a paradox. Destructive, yet creative. Feared yet respected. Barbaric in conquest, yet sophisticated in rule. After reaching its peak, the Mongol Empire began to fracture. The decline of the empire was gradual, but inevitable. The vast distances between regions, combined with differences in culture, economy, and leadership, led to political fragmentation. In China, The Yuan dynasty under Kublai Khan was perhaps the most sophisticated of the Mongol-ruled territories. Despite the collapse of the centralized empire, Mongol influence did not disappear. Even after the fall of the empire, the Mongol legacy of unity and connectivity echoed through history. Perhaps most intriguingly, the Mongols challenged the stereotypes of barbarian conquerors. While brutal on the battlefield, they valued intelligence, technology, and diversity. Today, Genghis Khan remains one of the most studied and controversial figures in history. Modern historians are re-evaluating his impact. Once he was portrayed as a destroyer, now scholars highlight his role in connecting East. The Mongols also left a genetic legacy. Scientific studies estimate that Genghis Khan's direct male lineage can be found in over 16 million men alive today. In the end, the Mongol Empire teaches us several enduring lessons: that unity can overcome division. From a fragmented land of warring clans, he forged a global superpower. Genghis Khan conquered half the world, but more importantly, he changed it forever.